Why do the books of Exodus and Numbers go together so closely with Leviticus in the middle? Welcome to Bible on the Go with Dr. Dan. Exodus and Numbers, the story of God's people. Well, the book of Numbers is a mysterious label that found its way into the canon because of the genealogies that were in the front of the book. The Latin church is, in my understanding, gave it the name Numbers. But the title of this book in the Hebrew text is the desert, because Numbers tells us about the wanderings of the people of God after they left Egypt. So in truth, Exodus and Numbers go together as volume 1 of the deliverance of God's people, the story of God's people, and volume 2 of the story of God's people. Well, in Exodus, what do we have? We have the story of the people of God who found themselves in bondage for 4 centuries, 400 years. As the book opens up, what does it tell us? It says, there arose another Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. When Genesis had finished, Joseph had ascended into second in command to the pharaohs and was responsible for bringing all of his brothers into Egypt during the famine, and they had existed there for centuries. But when that new pharaoh came, he put them into slavery. As they cried to the Lord heard their prayer. Moses was born when the Pharaoh was trying to kill off all the little boys, and his mother put him in that famous basket, and he was raised in the house of Pharaoh as one of the sons of Pharaoh. And so God superintended Moses' life. He was trained, as Acts 2 says, the book of Acts says, in all the wisdom and power of the Egyptians, and was powerful in speech and action. God used Moses to lead his people out of Egypt. After the 12 plagues, after his mighty hand and his outstretched arm delivered them, they walked through the Red Sea as if it was on dry land, because of the miracle of God. This Exodus was this salvific moment when God led his people out of 400 years of Egyptian bondage. From the Psalms to the prophets in the Old Testament, they look back at the Exodus as what God did for us, how he saved us with his strong hand and his mighty arm. It was truly a redemptive moment. And then in the desert, they found themselves wondering, because after the 12 spies had gone in to spy out the land, only 2 came back, Joshua and Caleb, with a positive report. And because of their disobedience in the desert, that first generation sinned and were caused to wander. Their punishment was to wander in the desert for 40 years. So from chapter 26 to the end in chapter 34, we see God prepares a new generation to enter the promised land. In Exodus and Numbers, Israel becomes a nation. God shows his abundant patience with his people. Even though they rebelled against him, he was patient with them. He was forbearing. He was full of loving kindness. But he had to be that God of justice too. So, Exodus and Numbers, the story of God's people. How God's people became his people. And because of what God did in the Exodus, how he watched over them in the wilderness and got them ready to come into the land, to possess the land, because of his mercy and his great and mighty hand and his outstretched arm, the Old Testament looks with longing for God's redemptive mission in the rest of the Bible. Thanks for watching Bible on the Go with Dr. Dan. Hit that like button, subscribe, and hit the bell so you can be reminded of new content. Praise God!